Elias woke up to a gunshot that passed an inch from his ear, and in the ringing silence that followed, he knew with terrifying clarity. The hunt was on. The sound was not the distant pop of a hunter's rifle miles away. It was a thunderclap, intimate and deafening, right outside the thin nylon wall of his tent. The smell of burnt gunpowder instantly overpowered the scent of pine and damp earth. Elias froze, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His hand trembled as he reached up and touched the sleeping bag near his head. The fabric was torn, warm to the touch, and wet with the goose down spilling out. If he had shifted in his sleep just a moment earlier, his head would have been the thing torn open. He lay in the pitch blackness, his breath hitched in his throat, trying to understand how his desire for peace had turned into a nightmare so quickly. It had started 12 hours ago at a run-down gas station off Highway 40. Elias, burnt out from a high-pressure finance job and desperate for silence, had asked the attendant for a recommendation. He wanted somewhere off the grid. No tourists, no cell service, just trees. The old man behind the counter, whose face looked like crumpled leather and whose eyes held a lazy, wet shine, had leaned over the counter with a toothless grin. Blackwood Ridge, the old man had drawled, pointing a grease-stained finger at a faded map. Folks do not go there much. Too steep for the casuals. But it's quiet. Quiet as the grave. Elias had thanked him, bought a pack of beef jerky, and driven the 2 hours up the winding gravel road. When he arrived, the sun was already dipping below the tree line, casting long, skeletal shadows across the clearing. That was when he saw the first red flag. Literally. Several trees around the perimeter of the clearing were marked with slash of bright red paint. Not the orange of the Forestry Service, but a deep, blood-red crimson. It looked wet, even though it was dry. A primal alarm bell had rung in the back of his mind. Turn around, his gut had whispered. Go back to the state park. This feels wrong. But he was tired. The city was far away, and the silence here was seductive. He had convinced himself they were just property markers or old logging signs. He chose comfort over instinct. He set up his tent, ate a cold dinner, and drifted off to the sound of wind in the branches, congratulating himself on finding such a hidden gem. Now, lying in the dark with the smell of death in the air, Elias cursed his stupidity. Crunch. A heavy boot stepped on dry leaves just outside. It was slow, deliberate. This was not a bear or a coyote. It was the heavy, rhythmic step of a man who had no reason to rush. Elias had a choice. He could stay still, play dead, and pray the shooter would check the body and leave. But the tear in the sleeping bag told him otherwise. This was not a robbery. The shot had been aimed to kill. If he stayed, the next shot would not miss. Slowly, agonizingly, Elias unzipped the bottom of the tent. The sound of the zipper seemed louder than the gunshot in the heavy silence. He paused. The footsteps stopped. The shooter was listening. Elias held his breath until his lungs burned. After an eternity, the footsteps resumed, moving toward the front entrance of the tent. Elias did not wait. He rolled out the back under the rainfly and scrambled into the underbrush. He was barefoot. He had no flashlight, no phone, and no weapon. He was wearing only his thermal underwear and a t-shirt. The cold night air hit him like a physical blow, but the adrenaline masked the temperature. He crawled on his hands and knees through the briars, the thorns tearing at his skin, trying to put distance between himself and the campsite. He needed to get to his car. It was parked only 50 yards away. If he could just reach the door, lock it, and start the engine, he had a chance. He rose to a crouch and looked toward the clearing. The silhouette of his SUV was visible against the starlight. He prepared to sprint. He took one step, and then the night exploded again. Crack. A bullet stripped the bark off the oak tree right next to his face, sending splinters into his cheek. The shot had come from the left, cutting off his path to the car. He was not just being shot at, he was being corralled. Elias abandoned the car. The realization that he was cut off sent a spike of pure terror through his system, overriding any rational plan. He turned and ran blindly into the dense forest, away from the road, away from safety, plunging deeper into the unknown. Without shoes, every step was torture. Sharp stones sliced into his soles, and exposed roots tripped him, sending him sprawling into the dirt time and time again. But he did not stop. He scrambled up, spitting out mud, and forced his legs to pump harder. The forest was thick here, an ancient tangle of pine and oak that blocked out the moon. It was suffocatingly dark. He could hear the pursuer behind him. The man was not running. He was walking, a steady, relentless crunching of leaves that seemed to close the distance despite Elias's frantic sprint. It was impossible. Elias was running for his life. How could the man keep up at a walking pace? Elias dove behind a fallen log, his chest heaving, trying to stifle the sound of his own gasping breath. He pressed his face into the rotting wood, listening. Silence. Then a twig snapped, not behind him but to his right. Elias's eyes widened in the dark. The shooter had flanked him. How? In this darkness, Elias could barely see his own hand in front of his face. He had been making enough noise to wake the dead, crashing through the brush. The killer should have been following the sound, staying behind him. But he was moving with supernatural precision. Elias crawled, belly to the ground, trying to move silently. He needed high ground. If he could get to the ridge the old man had mentioned, maybe he could see lights, a house, a road, anything. He moved for 10 minutes, his body numb from the cold. The terrain began to slope upward. He grabbed a sapling to pull himself up a steep embankment, his feet slipping on the loose shale. Thwip! A sound like an angry hornet zipped past his thigh, followed a split second later by the crack of the rifle. Elias yelped and lost his footing, sliding 10 feet down the slope. The bullet had not hit him, but it had been close enough to burn. He lay at the bottom of the embankment, trembling uncontrollably. Tears of frustration and terror welled in his eyes. Felt like a game. The shooter was not trying to kill him instantly. He had had a clear shot at the tent and missed by an inch. He had cut off the car. Now he was steering Elias away from the high ground. Every time Elias tried to move in a direction that might lead to safety, a bullet forced him back. Elias was being herded. He pushed himself up, his hands raw and bleeding. He turned away from the ridge and stumbled down into a ravine. It was the only direction the bullets had not come from. As he descended, the air grew damper, heavier. The trees here were ancient, their branches interlocking like the bars of a cage. He was exhausted. His adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, aching fatigue. He leaned against a massive tree trunk, sliding down until he sat among the roots. He needed to think. He needed to understand why this was happening. He thought of the old man at the gas station, the way he had smiled, quiet as the grave. Stupid? Elias whispered to himself, his voice cracking. So stupid. He was just a finance guy. He looked at spreadsheets. He drank expensive coffee. He was not a survivalist. He did not know how to fight a gunman in the woods. He was going to die here, barefoot and freezing, and no one would find him for months. A sound broke his pity party. It was the mechanical clack-clack of a bolt-action rifle being cycled. It was close, maybe 30 yards away. Elias forced himself up. His legs felt like lead. He could not run anymore. He limped forward, moving deeper into the ravine, following the path of least resistance. The forest seemed to be closing in on him, the trees standing like silent judges witnessing his execution. He stepped into a patch of mud that sucked at his ankles. He pulled his foot free with a wet schlock, losing his balance and falling face first into a cluster of ferns. He lay there for a moment, too weak to get up, and then he saw it. Lying in the mud, with his cheek pressed against the wet earth, Elias opened his eyes and stared into the darkness of the ravine. At first, he thought it was a hallucination brought on by shock. About 20 feet away, attached to the trunk of a pine tree about knee-high, was a tiny, rhythmic pulse of red light. It was faint, barely visible, blinking once every 5 seconds. Elias frowned, squinting. He slowly lifted his head. He looked to the left. Another faint red pulse, 50 yards away. He looked to the right. Another one. They formed a line. Perimeter. Elias crawled toward the nearest light, ignoring the pain in his knees. As he got closer, he saw a small black box strapped to the tree with camouflage tape. It looked like a trail camera, but different. More industrial. A wire ran from it down into the ground. He looked up. High in the branches of the same tree, he saw a dull reflection. A camera lens. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him more effectively than the fall had. This was not a random encounter. This was not a serial killer who just happened to be passing through. This was infrastructure. The red paint on the trees. The recommendation from the old man. The way the shooter moved with absolute certainty in the dark. Elias was not a victim of circumstance. He was product. The old man at the gas station was a scout. He spotted loners, people who would not be missed immediately, people asking for isolation, and sent them here. The odd marks on the trees were not property lines. They were boundaries for the game. The blinking lights were motion sensors. The shooter knew exactly where Elias was because Elias was tripping sensors every time he moved. The shooter did not need to run. He just checked a screen or listened to an earpiece and walked to the next intercept point. Elias felt a wave of nausea. He was not fighting a man, he was fighting a system. The shooter was likely wearing night vision goggles, which explained why he could see in the pitch black and why he was so accurate. The hopelessness threatened to drown him. What was the point? If they had technology like this, he was already dead. He was just providing entertainment before the inevitable end. Crunch. Crunch. The footsteps were louder now. Unapologetic. The game was nearing its end. The shooter had cornered the prey in the ravine, exactly where the sensors had led him. Elias looked around frantically. The ravine was a dead end, blocked by a sheer rock face on one side and the steep slope he had come down on the other. He was trapped. He reached into the pocket of his thermal pants, a habit of nervous energy. His fingers brushed against cold metal. His lighter. He was a smoker trying to quit, but he always kept a Zippo on him. It was a comfort object. He pulled it out, gripping the cool brass. What good was a lighter against a high-powered rifle and night vision? He looked at the dense, dry brush surrounding him. The ravine was filled with dead ferns and dried pine needles that had accumulated for years. It was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. An idea formed in his mind. It was insane. It was suicidal. But it was the only thing he had left. He remembered a documentary he had seen once about military tech. Night vision goggles amplified existing light thousands of times. They turned a starlit night into day. But if exposed to a sudden, intense burst of light, the footsteps stopped. The shooter was close. Elias could hear the man breathing now, a wet, wheezing sound. He was right at the edge of the fern patch, maybe 20 feet away. Elias did not stand up. He did not run. He uncapped the Zippo. "Come on out!" A voice rasped from the darkness. It was not the old man, but a younger, harder voice. "Make it fun." Elias grabbed a handful of dry pine needles with his left hand and held the lighter under them with his right. "Okay," Elias whispered. He struck the flint. The spark caught instantly. The pine needles, rich with resin and dried by the summer heat, flared up with a hungry whoosh. Elias did not just hold the burning handful. He threw it into the massive pile of dead ferns directly in front of him. Then he scrambled backward, striking the lighter again and lighting the brush to his left and right. In seconds, the ravine transformed. The fire climbed the dry bracken with terrifying speed, creating a wall of orange flame that reached 6 feet high. The darkness was obliterated by a blinding, searing luminosity. A scream tore through the night. It was not Elias. "My eyes! God damn it!" The scream was guttural, filled with pain and shock. The shooter, eyes glued to the phosphorescent green screens of his night vision goggles, had just had the visual equivalent of looking directly into the sun through a telescope. The amplification systems would have whited out instantly, blinding him, leaving him disoriented and seeing spots. Elias did not hesitate. He did not wait to see if the plan worked. He used the chaos. Shielding his face from the heat, Elias sprinted not away from the shooter, but toward where the voice had come from, skirting the edge of the fire. He saw a shape stumbling backward, a man in tactical gear, ripping a bulky headset off his face, waving a rifle blindly in the air. Elias ran past him. He could have stopped. He could have tried to tackle him, to take the gun. But the primal instinct to survive overrode the desire for revenge. He did not know if the man had a sidearm or a knife. He just knew the man was blind, and the path to the road was clear. He.s. here. He.s. moving. The man screamed, clutching his eyes. He fired the rifle wildly into the ground, the bullet kicking up dirt near Elias's feet. Elias pushed harder, his lungs burning from the smoke and exertion. He scrambled up the side of the ravine, digging his fingers into the mud. He reached the top and saw the faint outline of the logging road in the distance. He ran. He ran until his feet were bloody stumps, until his vision blurred, until the sun began to bleed gray light into the eastern sky. He did not stop until he hit the asphalt of the main highway, 3 miles away. A trucker hauling timber slammed on his brakes as a wild-eyed, ash-covered man in torn thermal underwear collapsed in the middle of the lane. The police raid happened 6 hours later. Elias sat in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a shock blanket, holding a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. He watched as the state troopers led the old man from the gas station into a cruiser. The old man was not smiling anymore. He looked small, frail, and pathetic. Then came the coroner's vans. 1, 2, 3. An officer walked over to Elias. He looked pale, shaken. "You were lucky, son," the officer said, his voice quiet. "We found the setup. Sensors, cameras. It was a playground for them. High-stakes hunting. People paid 50 grand a head to come out here." Elias stared at the steam rising from his coffee. "Did you find the shooter?" Elias asked. "Yeah. We found him. He was wandering near the ravine, rubbing his eyes. Retinas are burned pretty bad. He gave up the whole operation." The officer paused, looking toward the woods. "We found the others, too. 12 grave sites so far. Most of them were barefoot, just like you." Elias nodded slowly. He felt a strange, cold detachment. The fear was gone, replaced by a hollow void where his trust in the world used to be. He looked past the officer, toward the dense, green tree line of Blackwood Ridge. It looked peaceful in the morning light. Birds were singing. The wind rustled the leaves gently. But Elias knew better now. He knew that the silence of the forest was not peace. It was just the world holding its breath, waiting for the trigger to be pulled. He took a sip of the coffee. Tasted like ash. He knew he would never sleep in the quiet again. From now on, he would only feel safe in the noise, in the crowds, in the chaos of the city. Because in the silence, you can hear the footsteps coming. And by the time you hear them, it's already too late.